In terms of Trumanici, which is the area kind of to the southwest of our project, we have a very shallow, between 0 and 80 meters depth, high grade, on average 1.2 kilos of silver equivalent per ton is our grade. Fault bounded epithermal deposit that contains lead, zinc, silver, gold, and antimony. In terms of Brezheny, the second target, 13 kilometers to the southwest, and that's where the phase 3 drilling that we are about to start is going to be focused. We have, again, fault-hosted, shallowly dipping, 35-degree dipping body. So that Brezheny, we have struck the target zone at 480 meters. So between 480 and 500, we have that interval about 20 meters with about half a kilo of silver equivalent, of which probably 80% of value comes from antimony. So this is an antimony silver target. But the beautiful thing about it, it's actually shallows. So now what we're going to do, we're going to chase this thing up dip as it shallows and as it comes to surface in the context of about 9 to 12 holes that we have planned for this year.
For disclosure purposes, our site does not make recommendations for purchases or sale of stocks, services, or products. Nothing on our site or this podcast should be construed as an offer or solicitation to buy or sell products or securities. All investing involves risk and possible losses. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Alex, thanks so much for joining the show. For investors and followers that are new to the Terra story, do you want to just give a quick overview of how you started the company and your projects?
Good morning, Tali, and thank you so much for having me on. Terra Balcanica started in 2020 at the height of the global pandemic. I had at that time left Rio Tinto in California, where I was the global director of research and development, and moved back to Montreal, which is where I put together a little story about a few licenses that a co-founder of Terra and myself had staked back in 2018. They geographically focused on a well-known mining district in eastern Bosnia, surrounding the town of Srebrenica. And we had staked that land and really kind of forgotten about it, to tell you honestly, because both of us were busy with other things in our lives. But then, subsequent to my Rio Tinto experience, I decided to do something about it. And then between May of 2020 and September of 2020, so for those 4 months, I did manage to incite interest both in Vancouver and Montreal, and put together initial supervisory team, raised a little bit of cash to start off, and quite brazenly, or maybe foolishly, threw myself into the deep end and started basically doing field work before we ever got the first 5-cent private round financing over. I mean, basically, as soon as I had some cash, I hired 5 geologists and 5 geotechnicians, and we started prospecting, and that's initially stream sediment sampling. So that's how it evolved at the very beginning. We were private for the first almost 2 years, became publicly listed on June 22nd, 2022, by which time we had already raised close to $3.5 million through various private rounds, 5, 10, 20 cents. And then obviously in year 2022 is when we started drilling the project. By that time, we had already prospected enough, targeted enough, spent close to $2 million before we put a single drill hole down, which is a bit of a testament to how systematic and detailed and meticulous we were in terms of approaching what is really what was a greenfields project. I mean, yes, there was a mining district there. Yes, there is an operating mine 10 kilometers away from where I am right now. But ultimately, the land around that magmatic complex, which is 30 million years old, has never really been properly investigated in terms of modern exploration techniques such as airborne geophysics. And we profited from the knowledge that existed on the ground, primarily done and compiled by the Yugoslav geologists, communist geologists, before the country fell apart. Um, and certainly, took advantage of that to some extent, but then we also added a significant amount of new knowledge, which allowed us to target these two zones of primary interest.
Can you talk a little bit about the jurisdiction for the Balkans and specifically Bosnia? Because I feel like a lot of investors probably don't understand how great the streamlining of the process for permitting is, how friendly it is for mining, and then maybe some of your neighbors. I did see your press release that Adriatic was acquired by Dundee, which is fantastic, and I feel like a lot of people know who Adriatic is. So.
Right. Well, I mean, those who know something about Bosnia usually know it uh, by the bad things that happened in the 90s. Obviously, there was a civil war here. That's ultimately the reason why I ended up in Canada as a refugee back in 1995 in Vancouver. But I like to change that narrative, particularly when it comes to investment into a resource sector, by just mentioning one single name. That's Adriatic Resources or Adriatic Metals PLC. And for those who know that name, know exactly what I'm talking about. From the time when they put a single drill hole down to the moment when they opened the mine, it took them 6 years. So that's unprecedented rate of advancement of the project. Obviously, there's a reason for that. They were lucky to be brought to a particular area by some well-respected and knowledgeable Bosnian geologists in the first place. They struck immediately. A couple of first holes were unbelievably juicy. And they promoted the heck out of this project. So, fast forward to September, I think, or November 2021. So literally 3 years after they started, they raised $250 million US dollars, 253, if I remember correctly. So right now we're talking 21 million ton at an average concentration of a silver equivalent of something like 580 to 620, depending whether you look at the measured and indicated or inferred component. And I usually like to basically put that forth and tell them, point to me a place on earth where you can actually see an example like this. I'm sure there are some, but not that many. And I like to say, well, a part of the equation is certainly Bosnian government being forthcoming and welcoming the foreign investment, and I don't want to say bending backwards, but certainly being quite accommodating in terms of fostering a project like this. Obviously, the Bosnian government reaps benefits of this. I think Adriatic is, if not the largest, but one of the largest corporate taxpayers in the country. They employ about 350 people. There's a spillover effect. The town of Vares, which is only about 80 kilometers away from us, was practically a ghost town. And now, it's an entirely new place, a renaissance. So just, for all those ones who are criticizing mining and whatnot, I would like to use that as an example of what positive effects mining can have on a ecosystem of a local town or local region in a country such as Bosnia. So yes, Bosnia is an ancient mining jurisdiction. Area where I am was mined by the Romans 2,000 years ago. Actually, the name of the place was Argentaria, which stands for Silver City, because this place is well known for silver, lead, and zinc. It was mined by Saxons in the medieval times, obviously for the first time in the modern way by Austro-Hungarians and subsequently communist Yugoslavia. The mining code currently in the Serbian part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, called Republic of Srpska, is very much streamlined. You talk to one partner, and that's the Ministry of Energy and Mines. You apply for a permit by submitting a work program, which is supposed to contain 3 years worth of work, planned work. You get granted a permit, get a license that can last for 7 years. You have right to change your work plan. In other words, you can amend it as you go. You're not stuck to it. And after 7 years, the government expects one to convert the exploration license into a mining concession and really start working on opening a mine, according to their rules. But obviously, most public companies from Australia and Canada also work according to either 43-101 or JORC. So what you want to do is you want to satisfy both the local requirements in terms of proving a deposit or a resource, but also satisfy the requirements of the country where you're listed. So I mean, obviously, I'm a bit of biased because I come from this country. I know the region, I know people, I know language. Obviously, all those things are, something that you want to have under your belt when you start a project. So yeah, to me, it's kind of a homecoming, and it's been really, I mean, in terms of social license to operate on a local level, we have really secured it firmly. Obviously, we worked hard at getting it, but again, this is a mining region, ancient mining region, and people know who geologists are. They have seen miners before. They've seen people roaming the land and doing, ground geophysical surveys, so they're not freaked out about it. There's also an operating mine 8 kilometers from where I am and employs about 300 people. And everybody has either some member of family who works in the mine. So it's as far as Terra Balcanica is concerned, we really have a good jurisdiction located on the European continent, which is starved for resources, and in our case, a firmly secured license to operate.
So that is a great overview of the whole area and the history. I love that. Can you now, let's get into your project because I feel like that's the most exciting part. You've had some intercepts that I think, are you in the top 10 nearly every time with some of your silver grades?
I mean, according to, well, there are two outfits who kind of track that on a global level. I'm sure there are more, but the ones I know about are mininghub.com and minersdeck.com. These folks, I'm sure people have heard about them. They basically track um, intercepts on a weekly and monthly and yearly basis worldwide per different commodity. So whether that's lithium, nickel, cobalt, gold, silver, and yeah, I mean almost every time that we put a material press release out containing an intercept. When you use this particular metrics, a proxy for how good your intercept is, which is really multiplying the grade times the width intercept or width of the intercept, and use that as some sort of a measure, gram per ton meters, bit of a made up metric, but still useful so that you can compare different projects from different jurisdictions. In terms of silver space, our project is silver rich. Silver is the dominant metal, but it also is polymetallic project. So it does contain lead and zinc, and most importantly, as of late, antimony. Effectively, if you look at the composition or the cocktail of our metals in the Via Gorzani project, one could say that it's actually a silver antimony project because those two metals dominate the assays. When you convert everything to silver equivalent, they end up dominating. So we present everything in terms of the AgEq, silver equivalent. And yes, every time that we put forth a material press release, we get ranked, I would say, top 10 in the world. So that certainly feels good, that you're right up there. Confirmation of the fact that all that meticulously conducted targeting during the first year and a half, 2 years, and that was $2 million spent on airborne geophysics and 3,000 soil samples, and remote sensing and ground radiometrics and rock chip sampling, obviously hundreds and hundreds of rock chip samples, proved to be a correct way of approaching the project. So we have defined two target areas, one called Brezheny, the other one called Trumalichi, both of which I think bear tremendous potential. In terms of Trumalichi, which is the area kind of to the southwest of our project or southwest part of our project, we have a very shallow, between 0 and 80 meters depth, high grade, on average 1.2 kilos of silver equivalent per ton is our grade. Intermediate sulfidation for those who care, fairly simple geology, fairly simple geometry, fault bounded. epithermal deposit that contains lead, zinc, silver, gold, and antimony. In terms of Brezheny, the second target, 13 kilometers to the southwest, we have, and that's where the phase 3 drilling that we are about to start is going to be focused. We have, again, fault-hosted, uh, shallowly dipping, 35-degree dipping body, which we have intercepted, albeit at a much deeper level than Chumavici. So that Brezheny, we have struck the target zone at 480 meters. So between 480 and 500, we have that interval about 20 meters with about half a kilo of silver equivalent, of which probably 80% of value comes from antimony. So this is an antimony silver target. But the beautiful thing about it, it's actually shallows. So now what we're going to do, we're going to chase this thing up dip as it shallows and as it comes to surface in the context of about 9 to 12 holes that we have planned for this year.
Can you just give again a little bit more? I know you've done a lot of work on the project with like geophysics and airborne surveys and 2 drill programs. So can you just talk about just everything that's been done so far? Exciting for investors to hear all the work that you've done.
Well, hopefully I don't bore anybody to death, but yes, 216 square kilometers, we have identified almost every creek and sampled the hell out of all the creeks, trying to identify initially the target zones. Then we have conducted a fairly detailed 1 to 25,000, 1 to 5,000 mapping concurrently with rock chip sampling. So sometimes only fist size sample, sometimes 2.5 kilos size sample. So in doing so, we have then produced, updated geological maps. I must say that the Yugoslav geological maps are superb, absolutely gorgeous maps, very well done by the former Yugoslav geologists. And we didn't really have to do much in terms of adjusting them, except when you really come down to a scale of 1 to 500 or 1 to 1,000, where you can really, move lines up and down depending on how you see it. Soil sampling has been magic. So unlike northern Canada, where we have glaciers covering during the last glacial period much of what is now Canada and upper states as well, which have smeared the signal all over the place depending how the glacier cover has moved. In other words, the so-called drift analysis is what you need to apply to kind of find yourself where exactly is the signal coming from. Well, the Balkans of southeastern Europe has never been glaciated during the last glacial times, which is a great thing because there's nothing to move around the signal. In other words, if you do a proper job in terms of soil sampling, in other words, you reach down all the way to the sea horizon, you're not lazy not to drill a hole that's 1.5 meters deep and extract a 3-kilo sample from that depth and then send it for ultra trace analysis to ALS and pay $80 US per sample and do that 3,000 times. Then detailed and very sensitive tool, which allows you to see through the soil horizon into the bedrock. Why is that important? Well, because the signal hasn't been moved around. Soil has been very faithfully representing what sits underneath the soil cover. And we've used it extensively to target, let's say, Brezheny. Brezheny is an area that has never been mentioned in any of the archival information that we have come across. In other words, I call it Terra Balcanica baby, because it's never been discovered, never been mentioned, unlike Chumavici, which have been poked at and looked at by the Yugoslavs. But Brezheny haven't. And guess how we discovered Brezheny? Well, through rock chip sampling, and you do it densely enough and you do it detailed enough with good enough of a technique. And I must say that ALS has been amazing to us. They have an office in neighboring Serbia. Analyses are done in Ireland, and turnaround time is about 3 to 4 weeks. We were able to basically identify Brezheny, which stood up like a sore thumb in terms of bismuth, antimony, tellurium, gold, zinc, lead. Then we paid 500,000 euros to fly airborne geophysics. Not only one technique, magnetic analysis or magnetic survey, but we flew airborne geophysics, time domain electromagnetics, TEM, with the help of a Danish outfit called SkyTEM and a German pilot back in May of 2021, covering the entire area, 216 square kilometers, at a initially 300 meter spacing, and then infill with 100-meter spacing. I mean, we really draped the horizon and draped the topography. This guy was flying 80 meters above ground and picking up a signal. This wide antenna, 30 meters in diameter, projects the signal about 700 meters into the subsurface and receives the response. Basically measures the conductivity. So we had both the magnetic spectrum and electromagnetic spectrum that we combined together with our geochemistry. And again, in the case of Brezhnev, guess what? We had a massive magnetic blob, spatially overlapping our geochemical anomaly. And then underneath that, we found a highly conductive zone. So I'm like, okay, I mean, if this is not a target, I don't know what is. And that's ultimately how we approached the drilling, which came at the end. And then, of course, before we did the drilling, which is the most financially extensive step, we conducted some surficial trenching, good old trenching. So 300-400 meters of trenching right on surface, vertical trench, and then a couple of cross trenches and whatnot. And this is where we detected 1 gram per ton gold over 12, 15 meters in some cases. So when you put all of those, pieces of evidence together and layer them up, this is when I called the shot and said, okay, in August of 2022, let's put a really big, deep drill hole down, which went down all the way to 700 meters depth. And that's when we discovered both gold on surface in the case of Brezhnev and that dipping conductor, which ended up being mineralized.
I know you can't probably get into too many details, but now that you have this upcoming phase 3 for drilling, I know you had a press release out a couple months ago on the silver and antimony findings. Are you following that path for your phase 3 and your drilling that's upcoming, or are you moving?
In our case, we are a genuinely antimony project because these intercepts that I'm talking about were drilled back in 2022 and 2023, way before antimony ever hits the $25 a pound levels that it currently sits at. In Trinity drill holes, in some cases, I have 8% antimony over 7 meters. I'm like, wait a second. And then I realized it's truly genuinely antimony silver project. Although again, initially dubbed as polymetallic because indeed we do have lead and zinc and gold in some cases. Yes, phase 3 is going to primarily focus on this target called Brezhnev. We, as I said, have intercepted this conductive body, which we have interpreted to be mineralized horizon, 20 meters wide. We have intercepted it at 480 meters depth. Now, some would say, whoa, wait a second, that's too deep. But again, the beautiful thing of it is that like a phone or a piece of paper, it dips. And we have now punched it here, and now we're going to go up, dip all the way to surface. So the thing is it shallows at a fairly gentle angle. It is 600 meters wide, 1.2 kilometers long, and as I said, 20 meters wide. Now, obviously, nothing is perfect in nature. Things do tend to pinch and swell. And I'm not saying, and obviously everything's predicated so far only a single hole. I want to caution the investors. But again, very conspicuously, that single hole intercepts the conductor right where it's supposed to intercept it, which means, in my mind, that if we keep on following that conductor uphill, technically we should be hitting it again and again and again. So the phase 3 drill program is now planned with quite courageous step outs. The initial step out from the initial hole is going to be about 80 meters away. And then we're going to do 100 meters, 100 meters, 100 meters. And then on those subsequent platforms, we're going to basically repeat the dip and the azimuth of the hole. And then we're going to do one more on the side. So we're going to do it like basically cinder holes as you progress to the northeast, which is where this thing eventually comes to surface. If we end up being successful when it comes to Brezhnev and manage to follow this thing and keep on repeating these intercepts, I don't think anybody's going to be able to ignore this any longer because then we're going to, at least at the very basic back of an envelope calculation, be in multi-million ton ore scenario, which then is going to give me extra encouragement and motivation to go really crazy, for the lack of the better word, on phase 4.
Well, it feels like a very undervalued story considering the intercepts you have with silver and antimony, especially that, that's the one-off story that's kind of gone wild for the last 12 months. Can you just talk about like your burn rate and then maybe some of the competitive advantages that you have because you're obviously from Bosnia, you have understanding of the whole area and have very technical background after all everything that you walked us through. So I feel like, it's a very undervalued story.
A meter of drilling in Bosnia, all in, costs me 273 Canadian dollars per meter. That is the salaries, diesel, accommodation, foods, drilling itself, boxes, and analysis, the most important part. Which
Wow.
I must say, ALS is a great company, but they're not cheap. They're not cheap. It costs, and of course, we do, of course, everything by the book. So, ICP-MS with a proper prep and a fire assay finish, 75, 80 US dollars with a full, 60, it's called MS 61 package. When you see that there is a over assay package kicks in means that you're good because you have struck something that machine cannot analyze in the first take. It's over the limit. So yeah, when you put all that together, including the assays, we're 273 meters, which is actually probably half of what you would pay in Ontario, Quebec, or BC. Especially if you go up north, the rate goes even higher in Yukon and Alaska. So that's quite affordable. The burn rate obviously depends. Like the burn rate was $5,000 a month because nobody was getting paid, and we simply maintained the company afloat and kept alive. And that's sometimes what you need to do. Obviously, when there's a drill program, then the burn rate goes into hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. But that's a good way, good thing to do. When you have money to actually spend it in the ground. Another metrics that I'll mention to your audience is that probably $7.5 to $8. Let's say 7.5 of all the money ever raised in this company, and we raised so far about together with the life, which is going to be over this week. I'm not going to say more. We will have raised $9.5 million Canadian over the course of the last 5 years. Not too bad, and about 75% of all of that cash went into the ground, drilling, prospecting, targeting, paying salaries for geologists and whatnot. So this is certainly not a lifestyle company. This is a company that aims to find something tangible. Now, when it comes to to answer your second question, I'll try to be brief. Competitive advantages, I think there are few. Let's take antimony, for example. Apart from the Balkans and a few communist mines that existed in former Yugoslavia that produced antimony, either as a primary product or a byproduct, to my knowledge, there's only one other antimony project in kind of exploration stage in Europe, in Slovakia, I think, owned by the company called Military Metals. And just goes on to tell you how deficient Europe is in terms of some of the key critical metals. And I think having a project that contains antimony and silver, both of which are currently in demand, I think they're going to stay in demand, together with lead and zinc, that only 1,000 kilometers away from a BMW factory in Bavaria or 1,300 kilometers from Mercedes-Benz factory in Stuttgart, I think is a good thing. When you're connected by rail and roads, and you have seaborne ports in both Montenegro and Croatia, that's another good thing. Obviously, we would be, if this ever turns out into a mine. Another thing that, probably I get criticized for not mentioning enough is the fact that we have an operating mine 8 kilometers away from us. It's owned by a company called Mineco Ltd. They're our neighbors. So far, we haven't been, collaborating with them in any shape or form. But guess what? They have inherited or bought a former Yugoslav mine that I think right now probably has something like 3 or 4 million tons of ore left. So depending on how quickly Mineco presses the gas pedal, at some point they're going to run out of resource. Well, guess what? They have a crushing and flotation circuit on site, which means that should we find something mineable, we could theoretically truck the ore to the site and use or reuse their equipment, which at some point is going to become obsolete. So why spend money on capex when we have it on site, at least? And in terms of ore, obviously, we so far haven't done any specific metallurgy because it's too early. We've only done about 3,500, 4,000 meters of drilling on this project so far. So I must emphasize the project is drilled. One more time, this is not pie in the sky. This is a drill project. But we haven't done any metallurgy in terms of bulk sampling. So, but again, genetically, it's very similar to what Mineko is mining 10 kilometers away. I would be highly surprised if all of a sudden our ore would not fit their flotation circuit. I'm sure it would. So that's another advantage. In other words, you wouldn't have to spend 30, 40, whatever $1 million of building capex. It's right there. So, again, in terms of a Lassonde curve, after having detected these targets and drilled them, and we are now really genuinely at the cusp of that Lassonde curve where we either prove the size, we prove the mineralization exists. Now it's just proving whether this is a mineable size, mineable volume. If we get to that point, then I think it's gonna, I'm not saying replicate the success of Adriatic, although it could, but it certainly would be something that cannot much longer stay at 10 cents Canadian that it currently sits.
I love the high level overview of everything in Europe and the property, the project. It's fantastic. Alex, do you want to just quickly talk? I know you mentioned that you are finishing up the life offering. Where, like, my favorite thing always as an investor is share structure. And you have a great one. So where are you at with that all
Yep.
closing?
Uh, for all those who want to know more, www.terrabresources.com. Right on the title page, you'll see a PowerPoint, PDF presentation. I think it's slide 17. You'll get it. It's so-called money slides. So yeah, we are going to, when we close this life, which is going to happen this week, we're going to be sitting at 67 million shares, issued and outstanding. A little bit of warrants, not too much, about 15 million warrants or so. So not a huge overhang. Mostly insecure, but what's a good thing is that most of those warrants are sitting in the hands of insiders, what I call closely associated parties, board, and the management. In other words, well, at this point, I think the ratio used to be 2/3. In other words, 66%. I think now it has fallen down to about 59 or 60% of all the shares are in the hands of technically either insiders or very close to associated parties. We do trade quite liquidly, if that's a word, liquidly, on the stock market. I think 4 or 5 million shares per month, maybe even more. We do have a market maker officially assigned and paid for who makes sure that we churn over just a good amount of shares. I think at this point, people are basically just waiting to see what this phase three is gonna result in before I think the escalation really starts, because there's really no reason. I know some people have said that we are criminally undervalued, but I'm sure that's what every CEO says. Um, I like that word, criminally undervalued. But we really are, I think, in good hands. There's not much selling happening. There is some. I must say that last year in 2024, we raised cash primarily for those who don't know, our uranium portfolio. I don't want to obscure the story too much and divert from the primary topic, which is Bosnia, antimony, and all of that. But yeah, for those who want to know more, we have optioned 600 square kilometers of uranium portfolio in Saskatchewan. Um, and maybe some of the selling that we're currently seeing comes from those ones who you want to see that developed. And I certainly do have plans to unfold that, probably in terms of some spin out. But again, my primary focus, and this is why I'm physically in Bosnia right now, is to see this come to life. Speaking of life, life is, well, it cannot be oversubscribed because life has a maximum, and the best you can do is come to that maximum. You cannot go above the maximum. So yeah, we are fully subscribed. Let me use that word. $1.17 million. Obviously, majority of that will go into the ground in Bosnia in terms of phase three drilling. We plan to do 2,000 meters of drilling, 9 platforms, 12 holes. By the way, as of Friday, we are on OTCQB. So exclusive news for your audience. We are going to be listed on OTCQB. I think the ticker is TEBAF. Is on OTCQB. So again, a good corporate move, exposed ourselves to American audience, American investors, and together with our Frankfurt listing and CSC listing, I think we are, right where we need to be, especially if we start proving the thesis on the drilling level as well.